Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm Paige. I'm an addict. And awesome. We're going to dive right in. We're at the bottom of page XVII. I put it in the chat a little bit earlier because that's a tough one to tell you how to find if you're like, I'm not jiving the Roman numerals. We're 1, 2, 3 pages in, the forward to the second edition, and we're at the very, very, very bottom of the page. 2 lines from the very bottom. And so what we're talking about is the transition the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous made. So at this point, Alcoholics Anonymous, they've written this book, the book that we're studying, the book Alcoholics Anonymous. And as the book goes out to the world, we're seeing a new era in the history of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so it goes on to say, with the appearance of the new book, a great deal began to happen. Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick, really sexy name. You know what I mean? Like, ooh, Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick, you know, like, ooh. I always like some of these historical names to just point it out. The noted clergyman reviewed it with approval. So he was this well-known, famous clergyman, and he got a copy of the book, and he reviewed it, and he said, this is a good book. It's worthy of reading. It carries good morals, good values, that sort of thing. It says, in the fall of 1939, Fulton Oursler, then editor of Liberty. Now, I'm going to pause and talk about, Fulton Oursler, what a great name. Then editor of Liberty, printed a piece in his magazine called Alcoholics and God. And Liberty was like a magazine that would go out to the world that was readily consumed. It was, a lot of people would read that magazine. And it said, this brought in a rush of 800 frantic inquiries into the little New York office, which meanwhile had been established. And one of the things I want to point out is we go through page XVII, the page that we're on, unless you still haven't found it, in which case, come join us. I know it's hard to find. But what I want to point out is we're going to see the explosion of the fellowship. We're going to see the fellowship grow. And so imagine your home group has about 80 sober members, because that's about how many people were sober when the book goes out to the world. We talk about the first 100, but we'll say 80. And imagine this book gets published and there's 800 frantic inquiries. So imagine you have 10 prospective sponsees asking you for help all at once. Do you know what I'm saying? That overwhelm, that it's a lot. And I think that speaks to the need there was for a solution for alcoholism. We really did not have one before this book. And subsequently a solution for addiction as it applies to us in Cocaine Anonymous. And so they put together a little office. As each inquiry was painstakingly answered, pamphlets and books were sent out. Businessmen traveling out of existing groups were referred to these prospective newcomers. New groups started up, and it was found, to the astonishment of everyone, that AA's message could be transmitted in the mail as well as by word of mouth. By the end of 1939, it was estimated that 800 alcoholics were on their way to recovery. So imagine going from 80 to 800. Now, one of the things I want to talk about is that idea of at this time in history, there's 2, 3 groups, one in New York, one in Akron, Ohio, and one in Cleveland. And little groups were starting to get, started up in different cities and different parts of the world. But a lot of who was carrying the message were a lot of the people that were at central office. And if you're interested in some of those early days and sponsorship by letter writing, there's this book, it's called Bobby B, The Untold Story of AA's Fantastic Communicator. And it's an incredible story of the type of work that was done as all those letters and people asking for help were reaching out to this little office. And Bobby B, she's my gal. I relate. She took on too much, doing a little too much on the service. Can relate to that. We're aiming for a different ending on that one, folks. But that was a dark joke. But she essentially sponsored Australia by herself. And it's when we talk about like those early days, there's two things that come to mind. One is, never doubt the impact that a recovered member can have. Do you know what I'm saying? Never doubt the impact that those of us who have found this solution, who are armed with facts about ourselves, can have on the world around us. This one little drunk, she was able to essentially get AA going in Australia by writing letters. But it's also a reminder that, like, yeah, if writing letters and businessmen who are traveling would go out to these newcomers, going off on a tangent, I want to point something out. They're talking about going out, reaching out to the newcomer. They're not saying like, hey, if you want my help, you got to ask me. No, they're going out to try to find people to work with because they knew that in order to stay sober, they had to work with others. But also, it's no surprise that if AA's message, and therefore Cocaine Anonymous's message, because the message is ultimately the same, although we've widened the scope of, who we're carrying the message to addicts and alcoholics. The scope is widened, but the message is the same, that if you have this illness, this physical allergy, this mental obsession, we've got a solution, and the solution is a spiritual awakening, and how we get there is the 12 steps is directed out of this book. That message, if that message could be transmitted in the mail, I was joking before the meeting. I'm like, ooh, let me know if you want me to mail you stickers, but I'll let you know we do have a postal strike. You know what I'm saying? Like the mail. It is no surprise that this message could easily and readily be transmitted on a platform like Zoom. That we can transmit this message as effectively on Zoom as we can in person. Because we could do it with letters. It is no surprise that those early days of trying to carry this message, man, like there's something to the power of this message, and I'm glad we're all here. So it's in the spring of 1940, John D. Rockefeller Jr. Now he was like the wealthiest dude. He was like the wealthiest dude in the United States, which is what they call you. If you're the big rich guy in the U.S., they call you the wealthiest dude. You get a crown and everything. I got the Howard thumbs up, so we don't need to fact check that too hard. But he was the wealthiest dude, and he was known as a philanthropist, so he would give away a lot of his money. And he had a passion for alcohol reform. So he was a big, trying to make the sale of alcohol illegal and that sort of thing. And so when it says in the spring of 1940, John D. Rockefeller Jr. gave a dinner for many of his friends, to which he invited AA members to tell their stories. What happened was he had this dinner, and the AA members were like, hey, we're going to show up and we're going to try and see if we can get some of that money, because we would like the money. And they knew better than us, and we're like, absolutely not. We're not giving you the money. No, because they knew that it would ruin this thing. But news of this got on the world wire. So the story that this famous rich guy is meeting with these sober drunks in something called Alcoholics Anonymous, that acquired publicity. So it got on the world wires. Inquiries poured in again, and many people went to the bookstores to get the book Alcoholics Anonymous. And again, I want to emphasize the title of this book is Alcoholics Anonymous. The Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous is named after this book, not the other way around. That's why this book is important. That's why we're studying it. And unfortunately for DC, I'm probably not getting us to the doctor's opinion today. I'm doing my best. Ooh. So, it says by March 1941, the membership had shot up to 2,000. So imagine at your home group, there was about 80 people, in the spring you got about 80 people. And then in 2 years, it goes from 80 to 2,000. Could you imagine? Just sort of imagine what that would be like, this 100-fold explosion of members. And when it says then Jack Alexander wrote a feature article in the Saturday Evening Post and placed such a compelling picture of AA before the general public that Alcoholics in Need of Help really deluged us. That's like to be overwhelmed. If you didn't think the 800 frantic inquiries were overwhelming, wait till the Jack Alexander article comes out. Now, the Saturday Evening Post was a magazine just like Liberty. And this is only a helpful reference if you're somebody that's interested in like American art. But the famous American painter Norman Rockwell would do all these like paintings of Americana that were the covers for the Saturday Evening Post. So that's just, if that sort of visual is really helpful for you, it's rarely helpful for people, but I still make that reference. But so it was this magazine that would go out to the world. But who is this Jack Alexander? And why do we care about his article? Well, Jack Alexander had kind of made a career of being like an investigative reporter. Like his kind of deal was like busting scams, you know? His deal was like, ooh, who's ripping off who's trying to make money who? And I believe it was the Philadelphia Labor Union. He had like busted up that scam that was going like before this. And then his editor was like, do you hear this? Do you hear this? That there are all these drunks and they're like helping each other for free? That's gotta be a scam. You know what I mean? That's gotta be a scam. You gotta go and visit and figure out where they're making money, who they're ripping off, because we know them. We know them. They gotta be ripping people off. And Jack Alexander investigated Alcoholics Anonymous very skeptically. This is a man who made his living on pointing out and finding out where people were being corrupt and where people were scamming other people. And he investigated and he was like, whoa. At first he was like, are you guys doing like a Broadway show? But he investigated and he found out that AA was the real deal. And somebody who made his career busting scams, you know, putting out an article that was like, no, this is just a bunch of drunks helping each other for fun and for free. That was a message that carried weight. And that article was like so powerful and so impactful. You can find it online, but Alcoholics Anonymous also made it a pamphlet. And I'll share with you a little transparency. I haven't really fully ever read the pamphlet, but I was asked to speak at a meeting where it's like, pick a piece of literature that you've not read before. And I'm like, I'm gonna force myself to read the Jack Alexander article. And I will tell you, I describe like the things that I have tried to stay sober. I regularly say like, hey, I did not try everything. Man, some of the things that they tried in here before doing AA to get and stay sober, whoo, I did not try everything. And I'm not going to tell you what they are. I'm going to do a little cliffhanger. What's in there? Let me tell you. You'll have to look up what milk leg is. I was pretty sure I had it when I was reading it. But like, yeah, they got some stuff to try to stay sober, and that didn't work. I didn't try everything. So that Jack Alexander article, and actually Jack Alexander later helped edit the 12 and 12. Like he became such a fan of the work that we were doing. He helped AA with the 12 and 12. So, and this placed such a compelling picture of AA before the general public that Alcoholics in Need of Help really deluged us, that overwhelmed. By the close of 1941, AA numbered 8,000 members. So keep in mind, spring of 1939, there's 80. By the close of 1941, do you know what I mean? Like 8,000. Imagine your home group, you know, growing by that number. And it says the mushrooming process was in full swing. So this exponential growth, but what I also love about it being described as the mushrooming process is, I don't know about you, but where did God meet me? Where did Cocaine Anonymous meet me? And where do you find mushrooms? But in the dark. I was in the dark, and that's where God met me. Cocaine Anonymous met me. And that's where, you know, this thing grows. And it says, AA had become a national institution. So we're talking on that page about the expansive growth of the Fellowship Alcoholics Anonymous. And it says, our society then entered a fearsome and exciting adolescent period. What we're talking about there is the teenage years. And if you have, and we've all survived the teenage years. Some of us are trying to survive having kids that are in the teenage years. I mean, it is fearsome and exciting. Like, oh, goodness gracious, what a disaster. And so the Fellowship, Alcoholics Anonymous, it was having its teenage years. It was having some spiritual acne and braces. Do you know what I mean? It was trying to figure itself out. What I'm trying to say is the traditions are going to be a delightful coming-of-age tale. Stay tuned. So, could these large numbers of erstwhile erratic alcoholics successfully meet and work together? Rude of you to call me out on my natural predisposition for being erratic. Could these alcoholics successfully meet and work together? Would there be quarrels, which is to say fights over membership, leadership, and money? Because normally we get us together. Isn't there fights for that? Would there be strivings for power and prestige? And we can see there those quarrels, the things that we're fighting over and the things that we're striving for. Are not those things in my own life things that I put in the position of God? Leadership, membership, me deciding who's in, who's out, power, prestige, money, aren't those things that I put in the position of God? Would there be schisms which would split AA apart? Based on political party, based on religion, based on ethnicity, would there be these completely separate groups of AA? Soon AA was beset by these very problems on every side and in every group. So this wasn't just like an idea that this could happen. It was happening. There was the turmoil of the adolescent period. There were the strivings, there were the struggles. That's what was actively happening. And it says, but out of this frightening and at first disrupting experience, the conviction grew that AAs had to hang together or die separately. We had to unify our fellowship or pass off the scene. And if you're writing in your book, and I hear that's what all the cool kids are doing, you can make a little note when it says we had to unify our fellowship, that is tradition 1. That unity, that common welfare. Because if the group does not survive, the individual will likely not. It goes on to say, as we discovered the principles by which the individual alcoholic could live. Now, I take a bit of a controversial, not super controversial, because I still need you to like me, but I take a bit of a controversial approach. That the principles, they're not these ideas behind the steps. They are the steps. The spiritual principles are the tangible actions of the 12 steps. And so as we discovered the principles by which the individual alcoholic could live, those are the tangible actions that I need as a way of life so that I can stay alive. That's what I need. And so the steps are the actions that I take that take me to the spiritual awakening. It says, so we had to evolve principles by which the AA groups and AA as a whole could survive and function effectively. So we're talking about the 12 traditions. And so as we go through, we're going to break down the 12 traditions. It says, it was thought that no alcoholic man or woman could be excluded from our society. Tradition 3. I'm doing a little bit of a pregnant pause, not a full pregnancy because I can't wait 9 months. DC's got to take over next month. I can't, you know what I mean? But just time for people to write down tradition 3. That our leaders might serve but never govern. Tradition 2. We do have leaders in Cocaine Anonymous. We do have leadership. Leadership is a prized quality, but the leadership is one of selfless service, not governing. Me showing up and trying to help, not me showing up and telling you what you need to do, because don't I think I know what's best? See the difference? All right. It says that each group was to be autonomous. That's tradition 4. What that means is that each group gets to run its own affairs, to make decisions for itself as a group. And I always call that the Spider-Man. The Spider-Man tradition, because it's like with great power comes great responsibility. We were talking about movies, Spider-Man, pew pew. In tradition 4, with great autonomy comes great responsibility. With the freedom to make decisions, I also have the responsibility to consider the needs and welfare of other groups in the fellowship as a whole. Spider-Man. That there was to be no professional class of therapy. That is tradition 8. That the 12-step work is not to be paid for. That is always freely given. Tradition 8. That there were to be no fees or dues. Our expenses were to be met by our own voluntary contributions, because nobody's going to make us pay. That's tradition 7. That's also a good time if you have a 7 tradition link to go throw that in the chat. Perfect timing. I always like when a meeting's talking on tradition 7. It's like, ooh, does the basket get a little more full, Anywho, it says that there was to be the least possible organization even in our service centers. That is tradition 9. Now, I want to be very clear. That does not mean that our meetings don't start on time. They don't, or not end on time. That's a big one for me. I got to be eye on the time, eye on the prize. You know what I'm saying? What that means is that we are not organized like a hierarchy. There's not a CEO, CFO, managers, middleman. You know what I mean? It's a reverse period. In fact, the most powerful position that I could ever have of Cocaine Anonymous is simply member. Because I show up and I'm a member and every single person in service is serving me. And how I look at it is not like, ooh, I'm climbing the corporate ladder of Cocaine Anonymous. Instead, what I am doing is it's like I'm a server at a restaurant. The more I get involved in service, the more tables that I'm serving, if that makes sense. So when I show up to be of service to my home group, I'm serving that table that is my home group. And if I start serving a district or an area, I'm now serving that table, but also the table of district and all the other tables that are being served by districts. You know what I'm saying? And if you start serving at the world service level, then we're serving the world. It's not me climbing a corporate ladder. It's just me serving more and more addicts just like me. So it says, our public relations were to be based upon attraction rather than promotion. That's tradition 11. So at the public level, that it is based on attraction, not promotion. And it says it was decided that all members ought to be anonymous at the level of press, radio, TV, and films. Also tradition 11, that personal anonymity at the public level. And in no circumstances should we give endorsements, make alliances, so that's tradition 6, or enter into public controversies, tradition 10. Got no opinion on outside issues. And then if you're at one of those meetings where they're like, outside tissues, didn't plan on having a napkin there, but there we are. And it says this was the substance of AA's 12 traditions, which are stated in full on page 561 of this book. And so the traditions have a short form, but they also have a long form. And often the long form explains in depth what we're talking about in the short form. Although if we want to win at Cocaine Anonymous trivia, which why wouldn't you? We'll be on a team. We'll crush it, guys. Woo! Pew pew. This is my little fun fact about the short form and long form of the traditions. Tradition 2, the short form is longer than the long form, which is to say the long form is shorter than the short form. Delightful. That's how we do things here. So on page 561 of this book, and it says that though none of these principles had the force of rules or laws, they became so widely accepted by 1950 that they were confirmed by our first international conference held at Cleveland. And I love that it was held at Cleveland. You know why? Because it sounds to me like, in my mind, Howard's not here, so he can't fact check me. So I really can say whatever I want at this point. Kathy will give me the okay with whatever I say. But I love in my mind that it's like New York was like, hey, we had the first sober drunk. We should have the first conference. And Akron was like, no, we should have the conference because this is where AA started because we had 2. You know, if you look at Paul's screen, you can see it's a beautiful reenactment of Bill Wilson carrying the message to Dr. Bob, very historically accurate, in Akron, Ohio. And Akron was like, no, we should have it. And they couldn't get along, so they settled on Cleveland, which no one should settle on Cleveland. Cleveland is delightful. Anywho, so Today, the remarkable unity of AA is one of the greatest assets that our society has, and that is Tradition One. It's always important to understand that when we talk about unity, we're just not talking about the idea of unity. These traditions work together. What are we unified on? And what we need to be unified on is our fifth tradition, our primary purpose, to carry this message. All right. So while the internal difficulties of our adolescent period were being ironed out, I am still trying to iron out the internal difficulties of my own personal adolescent period. I'm in my mid-30s. It's fine. It's fine. Public acceptance of AA grew by leaps and bounds. For this, there were two principal reasons. So why was public acceptance of Alcoholics Anonymous growing? There are two reasons. One, the large numbers of recoveries. The work that we do speaks for itself. People were getting well and staying well. And it says, and reunited homes. Families were coming back together. Again, the result of our work carried its own message. And it says, these made their impressions everywhere. Now we're going to do some math. Pew, pew. Don't worry. I'm going to do all the heavy lifting on the math. I won't make anyone do the math. I'll do the math. All right. So it says, of alcoholics who came to AA and really tried. Now, I'm going to come back and I'm going to quantify that statement because really tried feels like a qualitative statement. How do I put a number? How do I put a definitive thing to really tried? What does it mean to really try? So it says, but of alcoholics who came to AA and really tried, 50% got sober at once and remained that way. So right off the bat, what we are seeing is a 50% success rate. It goes on to say 25% sobered up after some relapses. So we're talking about the numbers in between the first edition and the second edition, from 39 to 55. 75% success rate in Alcoholics Anonymous in those days. Now, it says among the remainder, those who stayed on with AA showed improvement. It says other thousands came to a few AA meetings and at first decided they didn't want the program. And that is how we quantify really tried. Because the meetings of Cocaine Anonymous are wonderful and lovely, and I'm glad you're here, but they are not the program. These numbers that we're talking about, sometimes we talk about the low success rate in whatever fellowship. And I don't think that's true. I think the numbers are still comparable with those who work the program. The program is not the meetings. The meetings are where we come to talk about and offer the program to those who do not have it. The program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and therefore for us, the program of Cocaine Anonymous, is the 12 steps is taken out of this book. And what we're saying is if you do this work, follow the directions out of this book, based on their evidence, based on their experience, what they were seeing was a 75% success rate at doing all, not just some of them, because I hear a lot of people that are like, oh, I did the steps and they didn't work for me. And you can ask them, it's a little rude to do it without their consent, but you can ask them, can I ask you about that? Because I don't find anyone where they said, I did all the steps and I relapsed and they didn't work for me. And I started asking some questions like, so how many people were you working with? Oh, no, I never sponsored anyone. Did you have daily prayer, meditation, and inventory going in your life? No. Were you doing 10 steps? No. Did you have amends that you needed to make? Yeah. Basically, it's people who maybe did a 5th step at most. So what is important to understand is that this works. And when I'm rocking and rolling and I'm showing up to Cocaine Anonymous, what is my percentage of success? Well, the percentage of success that this little crackhead has is 0. I'm rocking with a 0% success rate. I got nothing. I got 0%. 0. And what I have here is a way in which that replicates a 75% success rate. Now, one of the things that I'll point out is based on my experience. I've never, and I really mean this, I have never seen anyone that was fully engaged in the 12 steps as directed out of this book, Relapse. I've seen a lot of people not do a 4th step and relapse. I've seen a lot of people maybe do a 5th step. I've seen a lot of people sit on amends and relapse. I've seen people have dramatic and powerful recoveries. spectacular recoveries and stopped doing the work that allowed them to live in that place of grace and relapse. But I have never seen anyone fully do this work and continue to do this work drink again. I know the tryptophan is hitting for some of you guys. Tryptophan does not count as a relapse. You can have your turkey. All right, so it goes on to say, other thousands came to a few AA meetings and at first decided they didn't want the program, because don't many of us come to the meetings and like, oh, the steps, I don't want to do those. But great numbers, about 2 out of 3, began to return as time passed. What that means, why would they come back? Because there was not an answer anywhere else. And I can hold that up to my own experience. I'm showing up with 0%, and I could not find an answer anywhere else. Again, I didn't try everything that some of these guys in this pamphlet had tried before AA, but like, yikes, I was trying some stuff. Now, just because I won't be here, I'd like to take us to the medical view on AA. We're going to go to a quick tangent. We're going to go on page 569. Page 569, medical view of AA. And we're going to go to the third paragraph. 1, 2, 3, third paragraph, 569. But don't worry, put your finger on page XX. We're going to go back there, so don't lose your spot. It says on page 569, Dr. G. Kirby Collier, psychiatrist. I have felt that AA is a group unto themselves, and their best results can be had under their own guidance. And as a result of their philosophy, any therapeutic or philosophic procedure which can prove a recovery rate of 50 to 60% must merit our consideration. We need to consider that which works. And then when it talks about Dr. Harry M. Tebow, the psychiatrist, he was Marty Mann's doctor. Marty Mann, she was credited as the first woman in AA because she, got sober, stayed sober, and that was her doctor. So that's just a little fun lady history fact. Pew pew. All right, back to XX. All righty. Another reason. So first full paragraph, about halfway down the page. Another reason for the wide acceptance of AA was the ministration, like so many of friends in medicine. Hey, we just had a read from our friends in medicine. Delightful. You don't have to think that was delightful, but I thought it was delightful. Friends in medicine, religion, and the press, together with innumerable others, innumerable is too many to count, who became our able and persistent advocates. Without such support, AA could have made only the slowest progress. Some of the recommendations of early medical and religious friends will be found further on in this book. Yeah, we did. We were already there. We were having a look at them. Delightful. So, Alcoholics Anonymous, and for our purposes thereby Cocaine Anonymous, is not a religious organization. Neither does AA take any particular medical point of view, though we cooperate widely with the men of medicine as well as the men of religion. Alcohol being no respecter of persons, we are an accurate cross-section of America and in distant lands. Now, I want to point something out. When it says alcohol being no respecter of persons, we can talk about cocaine. Mind-altering substances being no respecter of persons. What that means is it doesn't matter my family, it doesn't matter my age, my race, my gender, my culture, my creed. It does not matter. Any single one of us can and will be affected by addiction. But when it talks about, so it doesn't matter where I come from, doesn't matter my history, addiction affects across the board. But when it says in distant lands, the same democratic evening up process is now going on. What that means is, by that same token, anyone can recover. Anyone can recover. And that's I've been joking about the hills that I die on. I got 3 hills that I die on. The first is that meditation absolutely did mean meditation in the 1930s. The second is that it is spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Not progress, not perfection. And the third is that you can recover. You can recover. That's my third hill. I'm dying on it. Fight me. I mean, not literally. Don't throw things. All right. So it says, by personal religious affiliation, we include Catholics, Protestants, Jews, Hindus, and a sprinkling of Muslims and Buddhists. More than 15% of us are women. Now, in 2024, that's not good. statistics or diversity. But I want to point out this is in 1955. In 1955, at a time where things were not as inclusive and diverse. You know what I'm saying? And it says, at present, our membership is pyramiding at the rate of about 20% a year. So it's growing. And it says, so far, upon the total problem of several million actual and potential alcoholics. Now, I read that and I'm like, ooh, potential. Only time in my life I thought I had potential. This little potential addict over here. In the world, we have made only a scratch. In all probability, we shall never be able to touch more than a fair fraction of the alcohol problem and all its ramifications. So we're saying like, hey, we can't touch all of the consequences of alcoholism. In our case, we can't touch all the consequences of addiction. And I love this because this is a message of humility. Upon therapy for the alcoholic himself, we surely have no monopoly. We're not saying, and some of you are hanging out in this meeting because you're trying to avoid playing Monopoly with your family on Thanksgiving. That'll lead to inventory for sure. But Monopoly, we're not saying that we're the only game in town. We're not saying that we're the only option that people have. That is that humility. But here it goes on to say, yet it is our great hope that all those who have as yet found no answer. So if you've got nothing that's worked for you, it says that you may begin to find one in the pages of this book. And that is why we're going through this book line by line, word by word, breaking it down and having an experience. And will presently join us on the high road to a new freedom, that this is a way of life. And the freedom that comes is indescribable. So I am doing better for time than I thought I would. I'm just really trying to help DC out because I know she was like not looking forward to do the forwards. But I love the forwards. So let's kick it off. Forward to the third edition. I got a fun fact about the forward to the third edition that's not fun, but it is a fact. Woo. This is the first forward not written by Bill Wilson. And you might be like, oh, why is that? Because he was dead. Ooh. See what I mean? I know it's not fun, but it's a fact. Yikes. So it says, by March 1976, when this edition went to the printer, the total worldwide membership of Alcoholics Anonymous was conservatively estimated at more than 1 million. So they're trying to like go under the numbers. 1 million, with almost 28,000 groups meeting in over 90 countries. Surveys of groups in the United States and Canada indicate that AA is reaching out not only to more and more people, but to a wider and wider range. Women, ladies, now make up more than 1/4 of the membership. Now I want to point out in the 70s, among newer members, the proportion is nearly 1/3. 7% of the AA surveyed are less than 30 years of age. Among them, many in their teens. And I will let you know my personal struggle, which is getting sober in my early 20s, which means I see that number 30, and I'm like, oh, under 30, that's me. And now here I am, 30s in the rearview mirror, and I'm like, existential crisis. But, it used to be under 30. And it says the basic principles of the AA program. And I want to point out again, my experience is that the principles are not nebulous concepts. Not like, like CA, not nebulous like hope and faith and courage and brotherly love and justice and determination and discipline, but instead the principles of the program are the tangible actions of the 12 steps. Because that was something I could understand and that was something I could practice. And it says the basic principles. So for me, the actions of the 12 steps, it appears, hold good for individuals with many different lifestyles. Just as the program has brought recovery to those of many different nationalities. The 12 steps that summarize the AA program may be called Los 12 Pesos in one country, Les 12 Étapes in another. But they trace exactly the same path to recovery that was blazed by the earliest members of Alcoholics Anonymous. You see that spark that was to flare into the first AA group that was struck in Akron, Ohio. That spark turns into a grass fire that blazes a path and it's one of those things I'm called to be on fire for this thing, right? And it says, in spite of the great increase in the size and span of this fellowship, at its core it remains simple and personal. Each day, somewhere in the world, recovery begins when one alcoholic talks with another alcoholic, sharing experience, strength, and hope. And two things, when we started off on this big book study and we dove into the preface, we were talking about how what has changed, the stories have changed. And if I'm interested in any stories that have been taken out of this book, there's a book called Experience, Strength, and Hope, and I did not think I would be doing this well for time, so I didn't bother to grab it ahead of time. So it's over there. It's out of reach. But you can order it, so it's not like out of reach for you. And so that's just a fun fact about that. But also, when we talk about for our purposes, one addict talking with another addict, what are we sharing? We're sharing our experience, strength, and hope. And what am I sharing my experience with? Of course, I need to share my experience with the illness that is addiction. So I need to share my experience with the physical allergy. I need to share my experience with the mental obsession. And while not diagnostic of addiction, it can be helpful to talk about the experience that I have with the spiritual malady. But it is also imperative that I am able to share my experience with the spiritual experience, the spiritual awakening in my experience with the 12 steps, our program of action. And I promise you, when I do that, it is a strength not my own. There is no strength in me. It is not it might be in me, but it is not of me. It is flowing through me. And I promise you, the hope is not my own. I am doing so much better for time than I thought I was, and I don't think anyone's as excited about that as me. Maybe DC, but she's not here. But we'll tell her how hard I'm trying for her. So forward to the 4th edition. This 4th edition of Alcoholics Anonymous came off the press in November 2001 at the start of a new millennium. And I will just say, it's really rude when people talk about things that happened in the 90s or as in the 1900s or in the last century. I'm rude, and it should be the last millennium. Just not helping with my existential crisis already. Since the 3rd edition was published in 1976, worldwide membership of AA has just about doubled to an estimated 2 million or more, with nearly 100,800 groups meeting in approximately 150 countries around the world. Literature has played a major role in AA's growth, because the literature is meant to carry the message. And it says a striking phenomenon of the past quarter century, that's 25 years, has been the explosion of translations of our basic literature into many languages and dialects. In country after country where the AA seed was planted, it has taken root, slowly at first, then growing by leaps and bounds when literature has become available. Currently, Alcoholics Anonymous, this book, has been translated into 43 languages. And what I want to point out is the thing about a seed. A seed has everything that it needs in order to grow. This book has everything that it needs in order for me as an addict to recover everything that it needs. And keep in mind, when I plant a seed, its early growth happens underground. Because for a plant to grow, it's got to grow roots before it sprouts up. And just because I do not see the immediate results of me trying to carry this message, that does not mean a message has not been carried. And I do this little thing at this point in the forward to the 4th edition, where I talk about if you imagine your dream vacation. If you could travel anywhere in the world, imagine where would you go? And we're going to imagine that this imaginary vacation is all expenses paid. So I'm paying for the imaginary vacation. Does my goodness know no ends? I'm so gracious. I got your imaginary vacation covered. And because I'm so generous, y'all get to go on vacation for a year or 2. So we're not doing a 1 week or 2 weeks. Some of you are like, girl, I don't want to be away from the house that long. I'm a bit of an introvert. But we're going to go on vacation for a year or 2. Now, one of the things we know that is as addicts, for us to get well, for us to stay well, I've got to work with others. So what do? So we go, imagine we're traveling wherever you would want to go in the world, and you start carrying the message. One addict helping another. That is the AA seed being planted. And little by slowly, a couple addicts start getting sober, start being able to recover, and they start helping others. Now, if I'm going to a country where they don't speak English, I am limited. In fact, I barely only speak English. You know what I mean? Barely. I do this one, and like, that's it. So I'm going to be working with English-speaking addicts. And what's going to happen is I'm going to work with these English-speaking addicts, and I'm going to start working with ones that are maybe bilingual, and they're going to start carrying the message to those that speak the language of the country that we're in. But when this book is available in a language that people can read, something incredible happens. There is an explosion of recovery, and it grows by leaps and bounds. And so again, what we are doing is we are pointing to the importance of this book. So it says, as the message of recovery has reached larger numbers of people, it has also touched the lives of a vastly greater variety of suffering alcoholics. When the phrase, we are people who normally would not mix, page 17 of this book, was written in 1939. It referred to a fellowship composed largely of men and one woman. And it says, with quite similar social, ethnic, and economic backgrounds. Like so much of AA's basic text, those words have proved to be far more visionary than the founding members could have ever imagined. The stories added to this edition represent a membership whose characteristics of age, gender, race, and culture have widened and deepened to encompass virtually everyone the first 100 members could have hoped to reach. And I might go a little bit over because I know I'm supposed to stop right now, but I'm going a little over, and that's my gift to DC and my apology to you. That is what I call the forward to the fourth edition moment. This moment where in the forward to the fourth edition, they're referencing page 17. This line in the book that was prophetic. This line in the book that has become more true as time has gone on. And what I love about that is we're about to read a forward to the fourth edition moment in the forward to the fourth edition, which it makes me fun at parties that I point those things out. I will go to a party and talk about forward to the fourth edition moments, which is why I don't get invited out that much. So it says, well, our literature has preserved the integrity of the AA message. So the literature is here to preserve the message, how we recover, how we get well, how we define this illness. Sweeping changes in society. So the changes are in society. They're not in the nature of the illness. They're not in the nature of recovery, and they're not in our solution. That has remained. Sweeping changes in society as a whole are reflected in new customs and practices within the fellowship. Taking advantage of technological advances, for example, AA members with computers can participate in meetings online or around the world. It's happening. And I'll let you know when we're doing it. When I first got sober, I would read that line and I would be like, well, because I have a passion for accessibility, and I had checked out some online meetings way back in the day, and they were text-based meetings, and they weren't the best. And then when COVID hit, and I was like, oh, I don't know, I don't think I'm going to like Zoom meetings. And I was right for the first minute and a half, and then it has been the best thing ever for the rest of the whole time. You know what I'm saying? So it says, in any meeting anywhere, AA share experience, strength, and hope. And again, what experience am I sharing? Problem, solution, program of action, strength that is not my own, hope that is not my own. Share experience, strength, and hope with each other in order to stay sober and to help other alcoholics. Modem to modem or face to face. AAs, or in our case CAs, speak the language of the heart in all its power and simplicity. And that's it for me. I can't believe I did that. You're welcome, DC.